A coworker who spent more time complaining than working snapped, "I shouldn't have to do all this. Someone else should handle it for me." When the manager overheard, he smirked, "Great idea, because someone else will be handling your job." The room fell silent as he handed over her termination letter. "I've been at my company for nearly a decade. It's not glamorous, but it pays well, and I like my job. I've worked with all kinds of people, some great, some terrible, and a few who make you question how they even got hired." That last category? That's where Rebecca came in. Rebecca was the type of person who thought showing up was the same as working. She had a knack for making every single task seem impossible. If something required actual effort, she'd groan, complain, and then, like magic, it became someone else's problem. Most of the time, that someone was me. At first, I didn't mind helping her out. I figured maybe she was struggling to adjust. We all need time to learn. But over time, it became obvious she wasn't struggling. She just didn't want to do her job. And somehow, she was getting away with it. Rebecca joined our team about a year ago. She was supposed to handle a few client accounts, nothing complicated, just basic follow-ups, reports, and scheduling. But within weeks, she started acting like she was drowning. She came in late, took extra long lunches, wandered around the office chatting. But the second she had to actually work, the complaints started. "I have a migraine. I didn't get enough sleep last night. This project is so overwhelming." At first, people sympathized. We covered for her. If she missed a deadline, someone would pick up the slack. But then she started acting like this was normal. One day, I overheard her say to another coworker, "Ugh, I'm just gonna wait it out. Someone else will handle it." That's when it clicked. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't struggling. She just did not care. And the worst part? Nobody was calling her out on it. Over the months, Rebecca got bolder. She'd show up late, see her workload, and immediately find a way to push it onto someone else. If the manager was around, she'd pretend to be busy, typing nonsense on her keyboard or shuffling papers like she was deep in work. But when Mark, our manager, wasn't around, that's when she turned into a professional excuse machine. One time, she forgot to submit an important report. When Mark asked her about it, she acted shocked. "Oh my God, I thought Opie was handling that." "I wasn't. I never was." Another time, she convinced a new hire to take over her tasks by saying, "Oh, it's just something we all help with." No, it wasn't. She even tried to make me her personal assistant. She'd email me with things like, "Hey, can you send this email for me? I'm swamped. Can you update this spreadsheet? I'm so behind. Ugh, I totally forgot to confirm with that client. Can you do it?" Mind you, this wasn't my job. I had my own work. But if I ignored her, she'd come to my desk and whine about how overwhelmed she was. If I still didn't help, she'd go to Mark and pretend she had no idea what went wrong. But the worst moment, the one that set everything in motion, happened on a Friday afternoon. It was around 2:30 p.m. Mark had just sent out an email about a big deadline coming up next week. Everyone was focused, grinding through work. Everyone except Rebecca. She leaned back in her chair, sighed loudly, and then, in the most dramatic voice possible, said, "I shouldn't have to do all this. Someone else should handle it for me." The room went dead silent. And then, from across the office, Mark smirked. He stood up, walked over to her desk, and said. Rebecca froze. She must have realized too late that she had said that out loud. Mark, our manager, was standing right there. He had that look, the one that told you he wasn't mad yet, but he was about to be. She tried to backpedal. I just mean, like, maybe we should split the work differently, she stammered. Mark didn't even blink. Rebecca, come with me to my office. Now, normally, when Mark called someone into his office, it was for one of two things, either a private pep talk or a serious discussion about their performance. I knew which one this was. Rebecca followed him in, her face red, and the door closed behind them. The office stayed quiet. Nobody said a word. But we all listened. At first, the voices inside the office were muffled. Just low talking. But after a few minutes, we could hear Rebecca's voice rising. I don't get why I'm being singled out, she whined. I work just as hard as everyone else. That was such an obvious lie that I saw one of my coworkers physically choke on their coffee. Mark didn't raise his voice. That wasn't his style. But his tone was sharp. Rebecca, we track workload distribution. I've seen how much work you actually complete. Silence. Then Rebecca tried a different tactic. The victim card. It's not fair. I have so much going on outside of work. I barely have time for myself. Mark didn't budge. Then maybe this isn't the right job for you. The room went even quieter. At this point, we were all pretending to work while hanging on to every single word. Rebecca must have sensed things weren't going her way because she doubled down. You don't understand, Mark. I'm under so much stress. And honestly, it's OP's fault too. I snapped my head up. Excuse me? They never offered to help me. They just let me fail. Now she was dragging me into this? Mark didn't even pause. It's not their job to do your work. But no, you were hired to handle this workload. If you can't, that's on you. I wanted to frame that sentence and hang it on my wall. Rebecca must have realized she was losing, because her voice changed again this time, angry. So what, are you just going to fire me? After everything I've done for this company? Oh, the irony. Mark didn't respond right away. Then he said something that changed everything. You've made it clear that you don't think this is your responsibility. So maybe we should find someone who actually wants to do this job. Silence. Then, in a much quieter voice, Rebecca said, I can do it. I just need more help. Mark exhaled. You've had help for months. You just don't do your share. Another pause. So I have a decision to make. Rebecca sounded nervous. What do you mean? I need to decide whether to let you go. But before that, I want you to prove that you belong here. That was not what any of us expected. Mark didn't fire her right away. Instead, he gave her one last chance. You have 1 week to prove you can handle your job. No excuses. No passing work to others. If I see real improvement, we'll talk. If not, then we'll have to part ways. Rebecca came out of that office pale. Everyone watched as she sat down at her desk, staring at her screen. For the first time in a year, she actually looked nervous. And the craziest part? She actually started working. But the week wasn't over yet. And none of us knew just how bad things were about to get. After the meeting, Rebecca didn't say a word. No complaints, no dramatic sighs, just silence. For the first time since she got hired, she actually looked busy. At first, we thought, okay, maybe she finally got the message. Maybe this was the wake-up call she needed. But deep down, I had a feeling this wasn't over. Rebecca wasn't the type to just accept consequences. If she was suddenly working, it wasn't because she wanted to. It was because she was planning something. And I was right. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later. One of my reports, something I had worked on for weeks, mysteriously disappeared from the shared drive. I checked everywhere. Gone. Completely wiped. At first, I thought, maybe I saved it in the wrong folder. But when I asked IT to check the access logs, they found something interesting. Someone had manually deleted it. And guess whose name was on the logs? That's right. Rebecca. I took a deep breath. Maybe it was an accident. I decided to confront her calmly. Hey, Rebecca. IT said you deleted my report. Was that a mistake? She barely looked up. Oh, that? Yeah, I was cleaning up some files. I thought it wasn't needed anymore. I stared at her. It was due this Friday. You knew that. She shrugged. Sorry. Guess you'll have to redo it. She wasn't sorry. She was smirking. That's when I realized she wasn't trying to prove herself. She was trying to drag me down with her. The next morning, I walked into the office to find an email from Mark. Apparently, Rebecca had sent him a message late last night claiming that I had been slacking off and leaving extra work for her. I actually laughed when I read it. The irony was too much. Mark called me into his office. I don't believe her, he said immediately. But I need to be fair. Just tell me what's going on. I told him about my report being deleted. About the weird little things Rebecca had been doing, trying to make it look like I was the problem. Mark sighed. That's what I thought. So what now? I asked. Now? We wait. That's when I knew. Mark had a plan. The next day, Mark sent out a company-wide email. Reminder, our system now tracks file changes and user activity logs for accountability. If you ever have concerns about missing work, let IT know. Rebecca read that email and went pale. She knew. She knew she was being watched. But did that stop her? No. It made her desperate. On Thursday, something even bigger happened. Rebecca went to HR. She claimed that Mark was unfairly targeting her and that she was being set up to fail. She even threw in some tears for good measure. HR took it seriously. They had to. So they called a meeting. Me, Mark, Rebecca, HR. For people. One truth. And one liar who was about to be exposed. HR scheduled the meeting for 3 p.m. sharp. I sat across from Rebecca. Mark was on my right. The HR manager, Lisa, sat between us, a neutral expression on her face. Rebecca had perfected her victim act. She slumped in her chair, dabbing at imaginary tears. I feel so attacked, she said, voice trembling. Mark has been watching my every move, and OP has been sabotaging my work. I don't understand why everyone is trying to make me look bad. I took a slow breath, holding back the rage bubbling inside me. Lisa turned to me. OP, do you have anything to say about these accusations? I kept my voice calm. I have proof she's lying. Mark leaned forward and slid a printed document across the table. This is an access log from IT, he said. It shows Rebecca deleted OP's report last week. Lisa scanned it. Rebecca stiffened. That was a mistake, she snapped. I already explained that. Mark ignored her and placed another document down. This is an email Rebecca sent me claiming OP was slacking. It was timestamped 9:45 p.m. after OP had already left work for the day. Lisa's eyebrows lifted slightly. Rebecca shifted in her seat. That doesn't mean. Mark cut her off. And this, he pulled out one more document, is an IT report showing that Rebecca attempted to log into OP's account twice after hours. Lisa's head snapped up. Rebecca, Lisa said slowly. Why were you trying to access OP's account? The room froze. I saw it then, the panic in Rebecca's eyes. She knew she was caught. And then? She snapped. Rebecca slammed her hands on the table. This is ridiculous, she shrieked. You're all against me. You've always been against me. Lisa tried to calm her down. Rebecca, no. You're all jealous because I actually have a life outside of work. She turned on me, eyes blazing. You just sit here like some corporate puppet, acting like you're better than me. I blinked. I hadn't said a word since presenting the evidence. Then she turned on Mark. And you. You just want to replace me with some robot who never complains. Mark's face remained unreadable. Rebecca, you're fired. Silence. For a second, I thought she hadn't heard him. Then, you can't fire me, she screamed. Mark stood up. I can. And I just did. Rebecca looked at Lisa, her last hope. Lisa exhaled. Based on the evidence, I have to support Mark's decision. Rebecca's face twisted into something ugly. You're all pathetic. Then she grabbed her bag, shoved her chair back, and stormed out of the office. The second she was gone, the office felt different. Lighter. Mark turned to me. You okay? I let out a breath. Yeah. Lisa shook her head. I don't know how she lasted this long. The next few days were weird. Everyone acted like the storm had finally passed. No more whispered complaints. No more sudden reassignments. Work just got done. And me? I kept thinking about that final moment when Rebecca realized she had no more lies left to tell. I didn't feel bad for her. I felt relief. She was never the victim. She was the villain in her own story. And finally, she got exactly what she deserved.